Good afternoon. Our next session on the final day of the Asia Economic Dialogue 2022 touches upon a key topic, that of India's contribution to reducing global vaccine inequity. PIC recognizes and honors the Indian stalwarts, Dr. Krishna, Dr. Cyrus Poonawalla, and Mr. Adar Poonawalla, and their teams for their tremendous efforts towards immunization of much of the world's population against the COVID-19 virus in record time. Thank you very much. We remain indebted. Leading this session is Dr. Raman Gangakhedkar, former head epidemiology at the ICMR, along with noted speakers Dr. Stanley Plotkin, Emeritus Professor at UPenn and Adjunct Professor at the Johns Hopkins University, Dr. Gagandeep Kang, Professor, Christian Medical College, Vellore, Dr. Krishna, Chairman and MD, Bharat Biotech International Limited, and Dr. Umesh Shaligram, Director R&D, Serum Institute of India. Welcome all.
It's a pleasure and honor to have a global visionary in vaccinology like you for this Asian economic dialogue. Your efforts in the field of the vaccine industry globally, and we hope to learn whatever we can from you today as well. To start off, we would like to know what has been the impact of India and its vaccine manufacturers in tackling global vaccine inequity so far.
Well, you know, my contact with India goes back a long way. Actually, I came to India for the first time in the 1960s because at the Wistar Institute in Philadelphia, I had helped develop a rabies vaccine, which was not made in an animal tissue, but which was made in cell culture. This was a revolutionary development of a new rabies vaccine. And I spent some time at the Hopkins Institute in what is now Mumbai. But at any rate, my point is that at the time, India was well behind in the development of vaccines, and I found little enthusiasm for developing modern vaccines at that time. But fortunately, over the years, that changed completely. The first hint I had of that was, I think, approximately 10 years later, when a gentleman from the Serum Institute of India came to my laboratory and asked me if I would give the Serum Institute the seed virus for the rubella vaccine that I had developed. And I was, of course, very glad to do that, but somewhat skeptical about what the final outcome would be. But then, I don't remember exactly how many years later, but then I had further contact with the Serum Institute and realized that they were doing an excellent job of producing the rubella vaccine in India, and therefore being able to immunize children not only against measles but against rubella. And I don't have to tell you that over the years, the Serum Institute has become the world's largest producer of vaccines. And now research is being done in India, not only at the Serum Institute, but in organizations like Bharat. And so over the years, I have come to know the Cyrus and Adar Poonawalla. I've come to know Krishna, and the the scope and size of the Indian vaccine industry has become in effect, the largest in the world. And its ability to produce vaccines, not only for India, but for other countries, is really tremendously important for the world. In addition, Indian science, of course, has increased. Dr. Gangakhedkar Kang is an example of Indian scientists that are making impact worldwide. I'll stop there.
Thank you, sir. From the perspective of the vaccine industry, it is critical for us to understand the impact of COVID and pandemic that is going on. What have we learned from this COVID pandemic? I think this becomes more critical if we were to prepare for similar global crisis.
Yes, well, the first thing that has been learned is not exactly news, but it deserves to be emphasized. And that is that obviously the industry has reacted very rapidly to the crisis caused by COVID-19. But what is not perhaps generally understood is the 20-odd years of research that went into the development of technologies that have allowed us to develop vaccines against COVID. So, you know, these vaccines didn't sort of jump out of somebody's head in a matter of days. It's all of the vaccines that are being used were developed based on technologies that were researched and developed literally over a period of 20 years. So that's the first point, the importance of basic research in allowing a vaccine industry to make vaccines. And so the second point is with regard to production. And that is a particular feature, I think, of the Indian-made vaccines. That is to say, the amount of vaccine that can be manufactured in a relatively short time. Now, this, of course, requires the cooperation of regulators. That is, they have to be willing to, on short notice, examine files and so forth, and conclude that the vaccines have been safely made. Now, going back to the techniques by which vaccines are made, obviously what has happened is the flowering of molecular biology in manufacture of vaccines. That is to say, vaccines made from messenger RNA, made from DNA plasmids, purified proteins, what are called vectors, that is, viruses, harmless viruses that carry information for immunizing against SARS-2, the virus that causes COVID-19. So what I think we've learned, among other things, which is not exactly news, is the importance of basic research before you can make a vaccine. And secondly, that companies can react rapidly and can do the typical phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 studies in a short period of time, and that regulators can cope with the information, the large amount of information that is produced in the course of vaccine development. Now, this requires, all of that requires the cooperation of public health authorities. And it means that governments, including the Indian government, governments have to realize the importance of the vaccine industry to the health of their populations. And you know, that's not trivial, because in some countries, and I won't say which, in some countries, the governments are not particularly supportive of vaccine companies, vaccine development. But it is extremely important because the government is, in a sense, between industry and the public. And if the government is not fully in support of the vaccine industry, that creates problems. I don't know exactly what the reaction of the Indian government was in specifics, but in the US, for example, there was the so-called Operation Warp Speed, where the government supported early vaccine development. And it's that sort of thing that I think is no doubt extremely important to prevent disease and to stop epidemics.
Sir, this particular issue of COVID vaccines and the inequity that tends to exist even today, and also the issue that perhaps people suspected whether these vaccines are really going to be safe. How does it impact the vaccine preparedness that we would require even for future crises that may come up?
Yes, that's a very important question, because vaccine hesitancy, so-called, is a worldwide phenomenon. And it's basically because people are uneducated. I'll come back to that point. But the thing is that people, or some people, are afraid of injections and afraid of receiving material that is injected into them. They have fears about what that will do to them. What we have to do is to face vaccine safety as both a scientific problem and a public relations problem. By scientific problem, I mean that vaccine safety studies must go hand in hand with vaccine development, that enough people must be given the vaccines so that you can draw conclusions about the safety. Now, you know, nothing in the world is 100% safe. I mean, that's ridiculous to think that that's possible. But on the other hand, what we know about vaccine safety is that, first of all, that the vaccines are highly protective, but in addition, that the reactions that are caused are largely trivial and short-lasting, and that serious reactions are extremely rare. Now, I said I would come back to a point about safety, and that is the importance of education. If I were king, so to speak, what I would do is that every child would have a course in statistics. That is, that they would learn how to evaluate risk. And, you know, the simple point is, if something happens, 1 in 100 times, or something happens 1 in 10,000 times, obviously the risk is quite different. But many people do not understand that. And that's why I think that every child should receive a course in statistics and learn how to evaluate them. And that applies, of course, not only to vaccines, but to other aspects of life. So what we've learned, what manufacturers have learned, is how to develop vaccines rapidly, going through phase 1, 2, 3 rapidly, and how to produce large amounts of vaccine without waiting for all the data. I mean, that of course is a tremendous risk to the manufacturers, but if they make vaccine without having the results of the phase 1, 2, 3, make it in advance, that enables the use of the vaccine to start rapidly. And that's what happened with COVID-19. The first vaccines were used in less than 1 year after the epidemic started. So another point which I would mention is the importance of basic science. And I would say, well, I don't know, I have no familiarity with what support the Indian government gives to science, but it is extremely important for governments to support basic science. Again, going back to, for example, the messenger RNA vaccines, they were the fruit of research, as I said before, over 20 years, supported by the US government. Now, that the US may be richer than many other countries, but rather than spending money on armies, perhaps some of that money should go to support scientific research, which ultimately benefits the population of whichever country we're talking about.
Sir, how would you perhaps look at the challenge that we are facing in COVID, where there is a rapid emergence of variants? Would it essentially mean that the R&D part should be integral component of the vaccine manufacturers, or should it be separate?
Well, you know, my view, and I have been pushing this now in recent months, is that the only way we are going to be able to cope with the numerous variants of coronavirus is to make what's called a pan-coronavirus vaccine. And fortunately, the basic research that has been done indicates that that is possible. In other words, a vaccine that would act against all of the coronaviruses and prevent them from causing disease in people. And the reason why that is not, not a crazy idea is that if you look at the distribution of coronaviruses similar to SARS-2, they're all over Asia. It's not just China. It's countries like Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar, and those are enzootic in bats. So bats are the carriers of the coronaviruses, and they, of course, can infect animals and people. So I think one has to look to the future and realize that there will be more coronaviruses. There was SARS-1, there was MERS, and now SARS-2. and we need to prepare for the future by making pan-coronavirus vaccines.
Sir, can I briefly ask, what would be your most important couple of advices that you can provide to Indian manufacturers who have played a critical role in reducing vaccine inequity across in the world? What would you summarize it as?
Well, I think the Indian manufacturers are already taking the advice that I would give, and that is to expand their scientific content. That is to say, the people who are competent scientists in their organization, so that future vaccines can be developed rapidly in India. And I think that's true for every country, although of course size matters. India, aside from being one of the largest countries in the world, is in Asia, where there are millions of other people as well. So the Indian vaccine industry should become the major manufacturer for all of Asia, really, and perhaps ultimately further afield. But the importance of maintaining basic research and doing the things that we talked about is capital. And again, I do think the Indian industry deserves a lot of credit for what has developed in the last, well, I guess probably 30 years or so.
I don't know how to put it in words, but we are extremely grateful that you could spare your valuable time and advise us. And we hope that our industry takes it up in a manner which will help us reducing the global vaccine inequity. Thank you, Dr. Plotkin.
You're welcome.
Dr. Kang, as we heard Dr. Plotkin, his views on vaccine development, one thing which clearly emerged that we have given a phenomenal response with respect to rapid development of COVID vaccines and also rollout. No, it is a unique kind of example. But at the same time, one thing which perhaps we could have even compressed the timelines if we were able to develop these vaccines within the country, and simultaneously the industry could have had started a production parallelly. How can we reduce this lag? And it might perhaps become very important since this particular virus tends to produce variants rapidly. So it is still possible that we may have to change the virus which we are using in the vaccine. So how should we be handling this issue?
I think Dr. Plotkin made some really important points about what needs to be done and the need to focus possibly on variant-proof vaccines, broadly protective vaccines. But if we look back and we look forward, one of the things that is clear is that the Indian government has been in partnership with industry in order to deliver the vaccines that we have. But in addition to all of the efforts that the government undertook during the second pandemic, I think it's important to also highlight that there are other efforts that are aimed at addressing many of the challenges that the vaccine industry has specified previously. For example, the availability of animal models, the availability of spaces where these animal model studies or challenge studies can be carried out, the availability of validated assays, of biobanks, of clinical trial sites. Now, many of these were addressed very, very quickly in the pandemic, and some of those had delays and quality issues that I hope that we will not encounter in the future. But just to highlight that in 2019, India and particularly the Department of Biotechnology invested in a program called INCEPI, which is a parallel program to the Coalition of Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, which has played a key role in the COVAX facility and delivering vaccines, more than 1 billion vaccines now, to the rest of the world, particularly in low-income. Now, had INCEPI started faster, perhaps our vaccines could have been made faster. And certainly, looking at the future, I think now with the facilities we built through INCEPI, through the pandemic, we've got the resources to do things more quickly than we did them in the past.
Dr. Krishna, one thing which becomes important as Dr. Kang is also referring to, some mechanism which should be within the country. For COVID vaccines, for sure that ICMR and Bharat Biotech, they came together and developed this particular vaccine very quickly. The same perhaps is true for rotavirus as well. If that is the case, that we have demonstrated our ability to go for collaboration and vaccine development within the country, what would be the key issues that you could highlight? What sort of challenges did you face? How should this enabling environment exist to boost up vaccine production?
See, India is in extremely good shape in terms of productions. I think we are one of the leaders in the world in manufacturing capabilities, all the Indian companies in general. Okay, so having said that, there was a big gap between a government and industry before. The earlier entrepreneurs, business people were exploiting the government system. There was a suspicion in the government system that businessman is trying to exploit. But we are a new generation entrepreneurs. We are all, scientists turned into entrepreneurs. And we really want to work with the government. We don't recognize the government as a separate entity. It is a part of us together as a society. And I think, the rotavirus is given an extremely good model where we worked on the public-private partnership. And now the Covaxin with ICMR and NIV is an extremely good partnership. In the process, there are hurdles which are in the process. I think it's sorted out now. I think the country is getting now mature. It's mature that both work together. It can make 1 + 1 can make 11, not 2. And I think that is shown to the country now. And I think the whole academic institute also will change mindset now hereafter. Even the industry will change their mindset. And I think it's basically a leadership. And I think if that is there, the commitment is there for the society angle. And I think everybody can work together and make it happen. And I think I'm the one guy, I know Cherry Kang was there in 5th December 2019 in Bangalore. Deputy CEO was also there, SEPI. I said, if the pandemic comes, entire Bangalore city will be empty on 5th December 2019. Exactly after 2 months, the epidemic came. So in the sense, we've been working on pandemic for a long time because the pandemic flu has given a signal to the society. Hey, I'm going to come in somewhere or other. And chikungunya came and Zika came. And, it's giving a signal to the society, I'm hiding and coming. But you be prepared, which one will come? So I think, nature is creating some sort of signal. And we need to capture the signal and start working on the planning and strategy in place. Thank you, sir.
What, according to you, would be the best ecosystem that should exist to foster this kind of development?
I think the faster ecosystem will be, I think we need to focus on a 5 or 7 viral disease, predictable viral diseases, 5 or 6 bacterial diseases. We have to predict that, probably sort of postulate some of the hypotheses. And it can be predicted. It's predictable nowadays. And predict that and make a quality control reagents and all the clinical samples, everything, keep it ready. We have ready, and I think that can be sourced everywhere. And actually, we are working in that type of directions right now. as a company. But I think we would love to partner with the government and government also both together. And we work together and prepare some of the assays, reagents. And that's the most critical when you want a pandemic to jump in quickly. And manufacturing cannot move without quality control. And clinical research cannot be done without reagent. So both are connected. So I think if we can get ready with reagents in preparation, and I think that will position us ahead of the game. Remaining all other things, it can move on, like with the platform technology, all known now. So most of the platform technology is known, and new platforms also will come in. And but I think reagents will be a crucial point in preparedness before. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Dr. Umesh, can I ask you how, the role that Serum Institute has played so far in reducing vaccine inequity globally with respect to other diseases, and in terms of how you have handled the COVID pandemic at this juncture?
Thank you very much, Dr. Gangakhedkar. First of all, thanks a lot for inviting me for this platform, and really appreciate it. Basically, Serum was established probably it's about 5+ decade now, actually. And since 5+ decade, we are now last probably a decade onward, we are almost supplying more than 1.6 billion doses to the world's largest vaccine manufacturing company. And what it has led to is very interesting thing, and this is all published by Professor Stefan Hopkins from Max Planck, that we have supplied about 25 billion doses of vaccine to the world up till now, actually, including COVID-19 last year. And these 25 billion doses of various vaccine has translated into saving of at least minimum 30 million lives across the globe, which would have otherwise perished, actually. And this is certainly a visionary effort by Dr. Poonawalla and our young leadership of Mr. Adar Poonawalla that has played a key role on this thing. And what this publication comes out is a very nice work which is India has done, especially by supplying this vaccine in LMIC countries extremely cost effectively in a high volume, which is beyond the expectations of even the agencies like UN agencies, which thought that okay, they would need this much, but the establishing the capacities, which was probably nobody ever thought, and having these capacities ready was something really an important work, actually, which has happened. And this 25 billion doses of vaccine which has gone into LMICs has saved millions of lives is a key role which is Serum Institute of India has played by giving it extremely cost effectively. Just to simply give you, measles has saved, it is estimated, has saved more than 24 million lives, actually. Then MenAfrivac A has really almost eradicated complete MenA in sub-Saharan African countries. And everybody knows MenAfrivac A was something which was probably the cheapest vaccine which Indian company could make it available, and there was no big multinational company was ready to jump into this kind of thing. Then there's a rubella, complete rubella eradication, as Professor Stanley Plotkin has told you, that entire Pan America has already awarded Dr. Poonawalla for rubella eradication, actually, by providing a cost-effective rubella. Otherwise, rubella would have been still a challenge, actually. And also so in developing world. So these are unique things. And in COVID-19, probably everybody knows what role Serum has played, actually, that, we are almost about 88 to 90% of over and above 80 age group. We have supplied our vaccine across India, and globally, I think now except US and Japan, everywhere we are approved, and almost everywhere we are supplying our vaccine. 2 vaccines, Covishield and Covovax, has gone, which is manufactured in India, has gone across these countries, and we are just waiting for some more approvals to come. But it's all like it is made in India, make in India for the world, and it has really gone across that. So that's a role which Serum has played in a short time, with as Stanley has said very clearly, that it's a huge risk which Mr. Adar Poonawalla took very heavily in early days and made sure that we have a lot of stockpile vaccine so that world needs and it can be quickly.
Dr. Kang, a small question for you. If you look at these COVID vaccines that are being that have been produced, there was a time when we used to speak in terms of the major limitation being the number of dosages that our industry is likely to produce for the global need that we had. But at the same time, now that the numbers are pretty high, you still find that the global inequity in terms of vaccine coverage continues to exist. Can you elaborate a little bit more on this particular issue?
Well, as many people have said, impact comes not from vaccines, but from vaccination. And vaccines are one part of getting vaccination done. What we are seeing, and most recently with the announcement of the Africa CDC director who has asked COVAX to pause the provision of vaccines, is that you also need to prepare the ground for vaccination. In order to have uptake, you need to have the right kinds of vaccines in the right places and the right people to communicate the need for those vaccines. So some components of this have not been built out. If you look at the COVAX facility, the fact that the US donates many doses of Pfizer or Moderna's vaccine does not address the issue of vaccine inequity in many parts of the world where cold chain capacity is not available. But you also have to have systems for distribution, vaccination programs that can get vaccines to places. And the problem for many situations is, where do you build a parallel structure and a new structure? Where do you use the resources that exist? If using the resources that exist means taking away from routine immunization, then what is the relative value of the two vaccination programs, COVID versus routine immunization? And some African countries are making the determination that this is not necessarily something where they want to draw from other resources in order to be able to deliver vaccines. You also have the problem of vaccine hesitancy, information, communication. The Indian government started out very well by making that 88-page document at the end of December 2020, which very clearly laid out in very simple language the kinds of messages to be communicated, the partners to be identified in order to build trust in communities. And we've seen that where there is trust, there is high levels of vaccination. Where there is no trust, there is very low levels of vaccination. So definitely need to work on vaccines, but also to work on vaccination.
But who do you think how do you think we will be able to enhance this trust? Should it be only a government work? How do we mobilize communities, in other words?
I think actually, Dr. Gangakhedkar, I don't think that the government trusts anybody outside government. Dr. Krishna pointed this out, that government used not to trust industry. Now we have moved forward and the government has begun to trust the industry to be partnerships. To be partners in the ability to deliver vaccines. Now we need for government to trust civil society, because it is ultimately civil society organizations that are trusted by people with whom they have worked for a long time. In many situations, what has happened, the government has gone into remote areas and said, we want to vaccinate you, and the response of villagers has been, you don't come to us for anything else. Now you want to come to us and tell us to get vaccinated. Why should we trust you for vaccination when you can't ensure that our women deliver in facilities, that our children are fed, that our diseases are treated? So standalone programs delivered by the government have significant challenges, and we really need to think about who are the trusted partners that can be mobilized? Educators, religious leaders, civil society organizations. These are trusted by our populations, and we need to engage them in the vaccination effort.
At the same time, I won't only blame the government because, if you look at the nature of the illness, where non-pharmacological interventions had to be placed in right away. When lockdown comes, when the fear of acquisition of infection comes, even CBOs find it difficult to mobilize at this juncture. So it's something which perhaps requires a lot of thinking as to how should one develop, how should we go for community preparedness in such kind of emergencies that tend to come, and still be able to ensure that people will accept. I think it was a huge challenge that we faced at this juncture. One of the issues which was also critical was we realized there were people who used to have worries about vaccine safety. I would perhaps look at it slightly differently. We may also have to think in terms of how do we make our regulator more trustworthy. Now, if that has to happen, both the industry as well as academia has to play an important role. Can I ask Dr. Krishna Illa to give his thoughts on this?
It is a very tough question and a controversial question. Look at the Indian regulatory system and the US regulatory system. Fine, whatever the differences are, fine. But US regulatory system, okay, it's the strongest one. Then why is it 40% of people are not vaccinated? Okay, so that clearly says it's not the regulatory alone. It's an important game in the game. So I think we always talk about blaming the regulatory system is the easiest one to attack all the time. But I think you look at that two regulatory system, I think India has done a better job than the US also in terms of vaccination. Okay, so I think it is not the regulatory system. I still agree with Dr. Kang says the civil society has local, they are in contact with the people, public, and they are more important because they trust every day they see them. And again, another thing what we are seeing is from childhood vaccination to we are still looking at adult vaccination. So that needs a different way of thinking and creating a trust in the people. In adult, I don't want to give it to vaccination to my father, if I think it is not all right. Okay, for my grandson, maybe I'll take a risk because he's a child. Okay, let us be protective. So there's a different perceptions in the society, and I think we need to understand that. I think this pandemic has taught us quite a bit how to make people to believe it. And I must still strongly believe if you have good science and good clinical data, and I think people will believe. And the safety profile is extremely good. If it is a safety profile is good. If safety profile is a little bit tricky, then it gets into it. For example, Omicron. Omicron is now, I don't call as a SARS-2 at all. I won't call COVID-19. Jacob John says it should be called COVID-21 now. It is an absolutely new strain now. It's not like a COVID-19 at all. It's different from all other strain. And I think good science, if we do it, like when Omicron is there, tell the truthfully whether it will work in the 2 dose or not 2 dose. I think that type of message will clearly indicate to the people that trust will be created. And I think it's a part of the government, part of the manufacturers, part of the civil society, part of the academic institute, and public, press, media, everybody is involved in this matter. So everybody has to be in the same phase of language. Thank you, sir. Over.
No, I agree with what you are saying, that it's not regulatory. But there is something which we have to understand, that each stakeholder plays a different role when it comes to creation of trust that you need for getting the vaccines per se. One of the steps that has always fascinated me was if you look at US FDA, they tend to have an open consultation when the data is submitted. I think it's something which is worth looking at. It tends to give a lot of confidence for people. It is possible that not all of them who tend to attend may be scientists, maybe doctors. But just the fact that it undergoes a rigorous scrutiny perhaps makes a difference in terms of preparing the minds of people whether the vaccine should be taken. And majority of the so-called that group that you talk of, 30 to 40%, we have anti-vax population. It is a fixed proportion almost for all the vaccines in USA or for that matter in different countries per se. But there are issues that tend to come up in terms of preparing before you roll out such a program. But COVID was a unique kind of a program, disease per se. Now, can I ask Dr. Umesh? No, one thing which you realize is you will have to produce these vaccines in large quantities, and at the same time there is vaccine nationalism that has also played some kind of role, sometimes good for that population, but at the same time the responses that have come from different countries tend to be slightly different. You find today that Serum or Bharat Biotech may be very large producers of vaccine, but every country is now looking within and trying to produce vaccine by themselves. How do you look at this particular challenge when there would be, a large capacity that you create within our country, and you find this kind of an approach becoming more common when people think about it?
Uh, Thank you, Dr. Gangakhedkar. So basically, certainly, all that is needed. It's COVID-19 was a unique challenge, and certainly, if I think India specifically has really played a different role compared to all other countries. Other countries, independent of a DC status, they were more to me and mine limited, and probably India followed a role of more Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. They initially started giving vaccine to almost all nearby countries and who's their need, at least protecting their healthcare system. Actually, that was key role which India played, no doubt about it. Certainly, second wave in India was a very harsh wave, and obviously, in such situation, you have to take care of your own home first. So that was probably a correct way of looking at it. Then the challenge which was certainly over there was how do we ensure that we have capacities and we really make huge amount of stocks of product and then make it available beyond the home country needs so that we can then have it supplied to everyone. Actually, that is something which is really important, and that's where probably you have to go with the concept of future pandemic preparedness, where we have created a big facility over here also, so which has the ability in a short possible time, if we can make 2 to 5 billion doses, in less than 2 months. In fact, technically, we have actually manufactured in starting from month of May till October, almost more than 1.2, 1.3 billion doses. So we have that capacity, but it is all going to be because we were focused on COVID-19, we utilize other product capacities. But now here we have created a new infrastructure, and probably geographically you need to have these kind of infrastructures all over so that quickly you can address and manufacture a huge billions of doses, so that these probably little constrictions which comes because of the disease intensity and the deaths which are happening, and countries has to focus for the in-house supply, is probably reduced because you are having more than country needs a vaccine, and you can still supply to the other part of the world, and you can then reduce the disease burden quickly and move towards the elimination target actually. So that's how one has to target. So certainly capacity building is key. It depends on the disease, depends on the situation, how you would like to build a capacity, because it's not only about building and creating an infrastructure, it's bringing about a knowledge set and understanding and fine level understanding of testing, analytics, and everything actually together, and also implementation. That also is extremely key role playing act actually. So it's all about a lot of aspects. I still feel that these aspects probably COVID-19 has taught us. Next time we should be well prepared for that and handle it out.
Yeah, any thoughts, Dr. Krishna?
Yes, I think a lot of manufacturing facilities are going to be coming up in Africa. But as an entrepreneur, as a scientist, what I see is how long that is going to be a sustainable model in Africa is going to be key. A platform technology like mRNA, they're moving there. And those technologies are wonderful for pandemic. I don't know whether it will be useful for children's vaccination program. When vaccines technology is changing, like a multi 5-valent, 6-valent, 8-valent vaccines are combined, how that whole platform is going to be, this thing is going to be very sketchy right now. But certainly the competition is going to build it. And I expect excess production facility and excess vaccine will be available globally. Oh, thanks.
Dr. Kang, how should we handle this issue in terms of science? No? That for sustainability purposes and for access, improving access, you would like things to happen within the country. But so far, things have been different. But how do we utilize their capacities, newly built capacities? And how should our manufacturers look at it?
I think there are new opportunities that have been created by the pandemic. One, even though it has not been quite reflected in our budget, I think politicians and policymakers need to understand that no country improves its economy without investing in science. Whether it is Korea or China or the US, we have to have greater investment in science. And that unfortunately has not changed as a policy so far. I think in terms of industry again, there has been a willingness to make at-risk investments. I think Serum Institute has the example of the government's investment in influenza vaccine manufacture that was pulled back, at least in terms of the most recent investment with Biological E, where the government decided to invest in a company that did not yet have a vaccine. That was a remarkable example of what I hope we will see more in the future. The government being willing to say that our industry needs the resources to be able to deliver. It is not only the responsibility of the industry to find those resources, to build those partnerships. Now, Dr. Ella's company received, tremendous amount of support from the government in terms of the right kinds of partnerships, and that's important. But so are financial resources important, and the government needs to think about doing that. Development banks need to think about doing more of that.
I would ask one question to each one of you, and that would be, what are your learnings from COVID, the way we have handled with respect to vaccine rollouts, vaccines, the way we have produced, the development of vaccine, and how is it influencing your future decision making? Dr. Krishna Illa.
I think the future is not going to be the same. Like the pandemic once down, and all the vaccine companies are going to have excess facilities, excess manpower, and how are you going to sustain that next 3-4 years is going to be a challenging task for everybody. That is going to be with the government also, going to be the Gavi also. Excess supplies are going to be there. How they're going to handle that is also going to be challenging for those agencies also. I think we are going to go in that direction. But the company which are sustaining on a childhood vaccination will sustain the business, will sustain the business. But the pandemic vaccine growth, whatever the growth, will be a temporary phenomena. But I think we need to take it in a hardship. And I think we need to readjust after a year, after 8-9 months. If the pandemic is over, we need all the manufacturers has to readjust their business plan and gain of manufacturing. The excess facility, what do we do that? And what can be done? So you produce the same vaccine again. If I produce rotavirus also excess, market cannot take it. So yeah, it's going to be I think it's very tough decisions we need to make as we go along. It's not an easy decision because pandemic time we expanded quite heavily, the facilities and all that, manpower, everything. Now that is going to be a tough how to sustain that future. But I think we'll come out some readjustment. In that process, we will find a lot of new childhood vaccines will come out from the facility. Thank you, sir.
If I can ask a little more, in COVID vaccines, you have different vaccine platforms which have suddenly come up. There are people who tend to believe mRNA vaccines hold future for tomorrow. There are some who believe other, perhaps, platform may be useful. Can you reflect on this particular issue now, whether you would like to ensure that that technology is available to you? How would you try to go for future developments of that?
Very rightly, I'll tell you, sir, making inactivated vaccine is more tougher than making mRNA vaccine. mRNA vaccine is pretty easy to manufacture. Okay, we were not ready at the time when it was not required. It was required. We were not ready, but right now we are ready. But the market cannot take it. So I think if I can make inactivated vaccine 1 billion doses, which are equal to 20 billion doses of mRNA vaccine, just look at the scale of operation. So live virus vaccine is the most toughest one, honestly. So far we produced about 450 million doses. 450 million doses live inactivated vaccine, no company in the world has manufactured. No company in the world. Inactivated vaccine, nobody has manufactured 500 million doses so far. I think that's a key in terms of, but technology, I don't think mRNA alone will survive in the market. We don't know the 5 years down, what are the other adverse reactions that you're going to see that from that platform. It's a great platform. I'm not denying that, okay? But it's required. But what will happen? But will I give it to a newborn baby? A lot of questions are going to come up in the process. So I think, as I said in the beginning, if I have 6 valent vaccines going to combine, so you're going to have 100 microgram of mRNA, 600 microgram of RNA going to be combining that. I don't think it's going to be challenging how the immune response is going to be in the body with 600 microgram of mRNA into the body and how it's going to react. And nobody knows that science. Nobody knows in the world. Okay, so I think it's nice to have all the platform technology. So whether it's mRNA, vector, or inactivated, all are important. So we choose inactivated at the right time because we want to look at that we have an expertise on that. Okay, that is how we choose. But I think mRNA is also pretty easy actually. mRNA is not a very difficult vaccine to make it. But now when you are ready, your market is not there. Okay, but I think a platform, well prepared India is now. Thank you, sir.
Your views on these learnings from COVID and future, Dr. Umesh?
Yeah. So as a country, as a vaccination program, I think we have set an example for the vaccination program. Certainly, we need to strengthen it more. As everything, you need to learn and strengthen it more. But certainly, compared to the World Forum and whatever has happened in the other big countries in the world, we have done certainly good in terms of really working out a nice coordination complexes, which our honorable PM has done with the vaccine task force, with the DBT, ICMR, as well as TCGI, everybody coming together and really proactively working. So that coordination complex and things working went very nicely, and therefore probably you are seeing the best outcome of vaccination program in the third wave. We are clearly seeing in third wave, it's almost you did not have to take any lockdowns or anything. Disease intensity went down dramatically. So as a country, we have done, I would say, really good. Actually, we have set the example to the world. Though we went through a lot of criticism, that was one part. As an organization, as a company, what I personally feel is that, in COVID-19, we have learned a lot. And what we have learned a lot is adaptability to new technologies and a quicker learning curve, and putting up a right mindset into a perfect coordination complex is something really very important actually. And that's what we have seen, because what we have seen is even our collaborator company had a tough time to deliver, but we were able to do that, and that was probably that right mindset coming together, and adaptability to the new technology, and dedication was certainly a very important task actually. So uh, any technologies you can work, any technologies you can scale it up, as we have seen that when we set up a 6 into 4,000 liter scale first time in the world, and now we have set up a 6 into 6,000 liter scale first time in the world. We feel that there are going to be challenges, but everything got resolved sitting in India, which were never done in the world. We are able to do that, and we have set a great example actually to everyone. So this adaptability to newer technologies and making life very simple in terms of method of manufacturing, in terms of global acceptance of your data and a global reach of your product is a very important thing. And that is something we have done a very nice as a country. What we need to kind of learn in future was where I felt was when there was a desperation, when pandemic hits you and you start seeing a lot of deaths happening, a lot of people suffer, and you need time to really manufacture a product. That time, if we can reduce a lot, and and can have a that reduction of a time so that product is quickly available, maybe something really good, which we'll have to find a unique ways of handling that actually. But certainly that is one of the areas we'll have to find a way of handling that. That quicker and faster response is also very critical, and reachability to the poorest of the poor and remote area is also very important. And that to build takes a lot of time, and that's where we need to really strengthen our. We have to use the technologies, and we need to strengthen our ways of doing this actually.
Your views, Dr. Kang, on learnings in vaccine development for COVID?
So I'd like to focus on where I think there are opportunities that were, to some extent, missed in the past. One I've already focused on, which is the ability to have appropriate, well-prepared networks of clinical trial sites that can conduct all phases of clinical trials. It shouldn't be a requirement that you build them new for each new product. And an example that I could use is the US networks, where they use the vaccine testing and evaluation units, they use the HIV trial networks, they had their clinical and translational support units, all of which had tremendous experience in doing clinical trials and were therefore able to recruit very large numbers very easily. The US has a population that is 1/4 of India, and yet most of the world's very large clinical trials were successfully done there, recruiting patients in a very short period of time, whereas we struggled with some recruitments here. So I think that is one thing that we should learn. The second thing is around vaccines and vaccination again, where I think it's important to learn from our own data. So right now we have lots of doubts about boosters, which booster is best, when should we use a booster, in whom should we use a booster, because actually we haven't demonstrated at a large scale the effectiveness of the vaccines that we are using. Most of the studies that we have on effectiveness are single institution studies or single organization studies. For example, the army, the police, AIMS, CMC, here and there type of results. Compare that to Israel, where the whole country became a living laboratory. There they have barely, 9-10 million people, and yet they were able to generate so much data so quickly. With India's power in IT and in data systems, there is absolutely no need why the next time around we cannot have a prepared system that will generate data quickly on impact and quickly also show us what choices we should make for the future.
If I could add to it, perhaps one of the major challenges that were there when lockdown was there and trials were to be done is we need to adopt different methods for even site monitoring. No, you can't be doing site monitoring for clinical trials or vaccine trials so easily when there are lockdowns all around. So we need to reflect on even the adverse event reporting, how it could happen and how that can be taken care of. But now I come to one important issue, madam. The issue is, if you were to recommend to these vaccine manufacturers certain organisms over which they should start focusing now, or how should they prepare for the emerging infections that might come up? What would be your suggestion to them?
So there is already a short list of organisms that might cause pandemics or virus families that might cause pandemics. There are 25 viral families that have such threats, and the US and CEPI have begun to use that list to think about what are the new vaccines that need to be made. But I also think that we should be thinking about vaccines for diseases that are important to us, whether that is Kiasnur forest disease, for which we rely on a vaccine that is of uncertain production capacity and sometimes uncertain quality, or whether it is Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever or many of the non-polio enteroviruses. These are very capable of causing outbreaks. And if we are to look at new targets, I would suggest that we should look at our own problems first. For example, India has the biggest burden of rheumatic heart disease even today. So if we take rheumatic heart disease and we take the other consequences of group-based streptococci, why aren't we working on vaccines for that?
Since you mentioned this issue of the zoonotic infections per se, now one perhaps requirement that could exist, as you see even in rabies, despite the fact that we have everything, we are unable to go after immunizing these animals. Now we need to adopt One Health approach. Whereas when it comes to vaccine manufacturing, you find human vaccines are produced, and when it comes to animal vaccines, the vaccine manufacturers are different. Now, how do we handle these issues? Because for One Health, since this is a zoonotic component, which is more likely to come up time and again because of urbanization, because of the human-animal interface, which is becoming more sharper. How would we actually address these issues? Because we have a huge capacity for human vaccines to be produced. But when it comes to animals, there is very little capacity compared to humans.
I actually don't think that's the case. I think we have a lot of capacity for animal vaccines as well, and we make a lot of animal vaccines. But the evaluation strategies and the regulatory processes for animal vaccines are very different from the processes that are followed for human vaccines. And I think this is something, if we really want to focus on this needs to be a strategy. Which is the approach that we are going to take? And we also need to understand, why do we do maternal immunization with tetanus, toxoid or TB vaccines now? We don't do it to protect the mother. We do it to protect the baby. So if we are thinking about animal vaccination to protect animals, that's one strategy. But if we are thinking about animal vaccination to protect humans, that's a whole different approach and a different range of pathogens that we need to look at.
Can I quickly ask Dr. Illa, what are your future plans now? Now that COVID pandemic is almost receding, though surprises could continue to exist, we may not be able to predict it as easily. Like you talked of Omicron, you might have an entirely different variant that may come up, which may make us question whether this is a drift or antigenic shift. So, what are your future plans now?
I think coming to your answer, before that, I just want to ask I just want to answer to, some of the animal vaccine. We have another company called Biotech in Bangalore. We are the largest FMD manufacturers in the country, almost 400 million doses production facility right in Bangalore. It's BSL-3 plus production facility, probably 2 facilities in the world. One is in Fulbright and second one in Bangalore. So we also acquired MSD Animal Health in Pune recently, old introvert facility. So it's all putting in the animal vaccine. Your question is valid because we need to think about controlling some of the disease. For example, Japanese encephalitis comes from the from pork, and then it gets into the humans. So we're looking at that target. How do you target? And Dr. Kang said group B, Streptococcus BB, which is again mostly comes from the fish, raw fish, and from the fish industry, it goes to the group B to the humans. So how do we attack that in the animal side of it? So we're looking at those sort of angle, bringing the one world health in a strategic game to the future. How do I integrate this game? We have good technologies, and how do you position those things? We have already a lot of manufacturing facilities for the animal side, not a problem. And so I think we're trying to think, how do you bring the one world health? Because all neglected diseases are turned out to be pandemic. And all neglected diseases turn out to be zoonotic diseases. All of them, whether SARS-1, 2, MERS, and all of them are zoonotic. So I think we need to focus on that, and we are going to have more problems. And I don't know, one of the hypotheses is that tuberculosis is coming from the cattle milk. Okay, you can ask a question. And BCG is isolated vaccine. What is isolated vaccine? Is also comes from the bovine itself. Okay, so I think we need to ask a lot of questions between the animal and because we're living together now. I think I've seen in Africa the poultry typhoid is going to the humans now. So I think zoonotic is going to be a strategy for me in the future. We're positioning how to, but two are different company, but we integrate the ideas together. So that's our future plan. Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Umesh, what are the future strategies that Serum is likely to adopt?
Yeah. So basically, our future strategies are, in a vertical where we are going to focus on a disease burden reduction and disease elimination strategy. So it's not going to be kind of only we will make X product or Y product. How do we achieve if there's a huge disease burden? How do we achieve a burden reduction? And how do we focus on elimination? So, for example, malaria, we are most advanced clinical stage. We are in fact finished a complete recruitment in our large phase 3, and we'll be shortly unblinding our data. But then we are not stopping at one product. What we are trying to do is we are doing a multiple product so that we can achieve an elimination goal actually. So that is a unique strategy which we are doing. So we are not making only one product and survive with one product. So same thing with TB, same thing in malaria. Same thing in HIV also we are starting. So any disease, anything where we find it's really kind of work, but then we will put all around efforts around that disease. So it is not one product, and if it is not successful, over. We unfortunately sorry. Or if it is successful, then we expect some kind of a business coming out. Instead of that, what we are focusing more on really working out as a global disease burden reduction and disease elimination strategies with a very cost-effective solutions giving. So it's like what the Dr. Gagandeep Kang has said. We need to really look at a holistically from not only product is one part of it, but some unique solution. actually. Like in our TV skin test, we are also going to come out with an AI application, which is going to really make a difference in doing this entire activity on a point of care test. Actually. So all these unique integrated solution from which probably drives the entire start to end ecosystem is something which we are looking out for nowadays. So now we are, product is one part of it, doing a trial is one part of it, and driving a product and getting registration was one part of it. But a complete solution with the ease of operation is something which we are really focused on to it. And you would see in some of our TV efforts and upcoming efforts in other diseases, you'll start seeing these integrated solutions coming out. So it's like a detect, treat, and prevent, or detect and prevent. These are the kind of strategies we have started putting out. So it's not only one product. Okay, there's a vaccine available, and you take the vaccine, and agencies take great, if government takes great, if not, sorry, we can't do that. No, it's not like that. Can we eliminate it? Can we take a disease and eliminate it completely? Like how we are achieving smallpox or polio or other diseases, or maybe COVID-19 also, which will get probably eliminated. We don't know. But this is how we are trying to really think in future strategies.
Unfortunately, the time that we are left with is very little. No, we may have to close down the discussions. I thank Dr. Plotkin, Dr. Kang, Dr. Krishna, Dr. Umesh for sparing your valuable time and giving your insights on these valuable issues. Though India has become the world's largest vaccine manufacturer or manufacturing hub, it is important that with our efforts, we should be able to ensure that we remain the same over a period of time. We should be able to address the different challenges that tend to come very quickly. Perhaps we had a hybrid kind of a model at this juncture. Here for COVID, we responded quickly, but that was in response to emergencies that came as a pandemic per se, where we had products coming from India and products also coming from outside, which we could roll out. We could ensure that we manufacture the same. But now that we have some time, whatever discussion we had today should make us think, reflect on different issues as to how we will be able to perform better and remain number one as vaccine manufacturing hub in the world. I thank all of you to have spared your very valuable time and deliberated on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We head into a break now. Session 3 on day 3 will commence at 4:30 p.m. in the afternoon, IST. Please join us back then. Good afternoon.